Mind you, I've jumped out of military airplanes, never broke a bone. I have to emphasize that never broke a bone.
Wow.
I was running August 19th, 2022. I'll never forget it. And I ended up stubbing my toe, twisting my left ankle all the way around, broke it in two places.
Oh
And when I
my.
tried to break my fall,
Welcome back to Leadership Beyond Burnout. I'm your host, Dr. Kimberly L. Wilson, and I'm not sure if it captured that. Welcome back to Leadership Beyond Burnout. I'm your host, Dr. Kimberly L. Wilson. And for those of you that are new, welcome, and I hope you enjoy the show. Our focus is on leadership, mental health, wellness, and burnout recovery. Today, we have a very special guest. I'd like to introduce you to her. Her name is Dr. Ari McGrew. Ariel McGrew, PhD, is a distinguished expert in business psychology, the founder of Tactful Disruption. She's a Forbes-recognized mental health coaching practice and clinical director of Offscript, a practice dedicated to BIPOC on the autism spectrum. With over 15 years in the Army Reserves as a Psyop Specialist, airborne, her unique blend of military experience and deep academic expertise empowers her innovative approach to mental health. McGrew's work, celebrated for its impact on neurodiversity and mental wellness, showcases her dedication to breaking barriers and fostering inclusivity within the mental health landscape. And without further ado, let's bring her aboard.
hello, thank you for having me.
Welcome. I'm so glad you could make it here today. I know that you have made some interesting strides in your career. And let's just kind of start off with, how do you feel like you bring healing to the world?
Oh, I just keep it real. You know that I think sometimes when we talk about like what healing is or what healing isn't, and there's all this like copycat paste, and it's like, okay, is that hurting you? Because if that's hurting you, that's probably not the thing that's healing you, right? And I know sometimes, like if you break a bone, the pain gets worse before it gets better, but you have to give it its time and process. So I'm just real about like the length of time and like the capacity of mind, and then just the competency that comes with going through it versus just like, oh, I read this in a book, and the book says it's like, well, you might not be a textbook person. You might just be somebody who's got to get it from the school of hard knocks. So I just keep it real. That's how I help people heal.
And I think that's such an apropos answer with the fact that you work with BIPOC who are neurodiverse, because what's in the textbook isn't always applicable to them. Is that what you find as well?
I do. I find that I will work with individuals who'll come to me because they think it's anxiety, and they're like, "Oh, like, Then we'll start talking about like highly sensitive persons types, and just kind of making that differentiation between if you're really highly sensitive person, which is more personality based, or if you are on the spectrum and you have some sensory processing challenges and or social awkwardness and or just that sense of otherness, and then just things you can go back to remember from your youth, and then it's like, okay, let's put the picture together, and it's like, hey, somebody might have missed this, but you might be autistic. And I think that that's just a conversation I don't see at the forefront in the Black community.
Hmm. Right. I think we're still trying to uncover what that means just in general, rather than old time wisdom. So I'm really curious, considering your in-depth work with BIPOC clients on autism and spectrum. and the commitment to mental wellness, how do you perceive the intersectionality of race, neurodiversity, and burnout?
Well, I think that we get the short end of that stick more often than not because, and I think this is very specific to households too, right? There are those idioms you grow up with. You know, it's like you can't afford to be depressed. You have to work hard. You have to be strong. You know, you have to acknowledge that like the powers that be don't look like you. And it's like if you keep pushing through that and you don't know that you've got something going on with you, um, you're challenged in a different way because there's still the stigma of like, okay, should I go get help for my mental health? And then as you're progressing through it, there's probably real traumas that haven't been associated just because child rearing in the BIPOC community looks very different than other communities. So that exacerbates some of those issues, the repression, and then just trying to navigate new spaces where you might be different. You might be the only one of you. And then you've got something going on where you're like, I'm not like these people.
Right.
There's a lot to unfold and unpack there.
So the two very ignored and denied aspects in the BIPOC community. So there's typically sounds like you're saying there's really no frame of reference, and then you add some trauma on top of there. It's
Hmm.
a nice little stew.
Yes. And it might be too late. It might be 43 before you realize, or you find a therapist skilled enough and has the cultural humility to really acknowledge, like, let me refer you to neuropsych testing. Let's see what this might look like, right? Because we could be calling it ADHD or ADD or any of the other things that fall in of neurodiversity when it really truly could be that hey, we just don't get diagnosed as often.
Would you do you feel that those who are BIPOC are challenged to be able to even admit that there is some neurodiversity, trauma, or autism with someone from the majority as a therapist? Like, is there some difficulty? Is there some desire to protect the culture rather than admit to some of those things?
I think that's a really powerful question, and I don't honestly know if I have the answer today because I kind of fell into this happenstance.
Hmm.
I may I share how I ended up over here?
Oh, absolutely.
So I was in a business development class for the consulting psychologist. That was the name of the class. I come up with a marketing plan for our companies. And I was just like, mental health and the workplace go together because just the history of Black work in America. Right? Like it's like overseer, just work. And like, you know, you don't get compensated fairly or if at all. There's trauma, right? There's trauma attached to all those things. And so I had a thing where, like, for part of my self care was just like I would read tarot here and there, my Instagram content was something that a lot of people say, "Hey, I really like this," and we use the little wood mannequins as expression. And I took that content and turned it into an oracle deck, and I was trying to figure out how am I going to create a marketing plan. I don't understand. There's so many things, and so I've
And
always
could you
just
explain an oracle deck for those who are just like, I don't know what she's talking about?
yes. So an oracle deck can be a really type of like guidance. So it's in the world of tarot. So tarot, it's 72 cards, and there's major arcana that are 22, and then like this other 58 or so. That might not be the right number if you do the math, but that are minor arcana. And actually, there's like if you go back into it, right, way back when they call this cartomancy, and it fell under hoodoo practices, and so it was a way for us to do divination, right, to really keep our the spiritual conversation alive. And
Hmm.
so when you're practicing this as like a form of divination, Oracle was brought in just in case you couldn't quite get with the archetypes. So, you know, like if the major arcana of those 22 say the Empress is affiliated with Taurus, and there's a lot more to it, like the astrology.
Hmm.
So the Oracle deck was like, yeah, I don't want to do all that. So here's some wise saying, apply it to your life if it's applicable. And so I had
Okay.
these cards where I would say, you know, like it's like a something is not a leap of faith, and then like in smaller print it's like work for your competency, and I'll share the end with you. And so it's one of these things where you would see these and be like, yeah, that resonates with me. And so I was like, okay, how do I talk to people? And at the time, TikTok was becoming a thing. Or
Mhm.
maybe I was just late to the game. Who knows? And so I hopped on TikTok. I was like, I don't know you. I don't know your life. I just read these cards. And so I was reading the cards and kind of just delivering the message, what we would call channeling the message.
Mhm.
And I saw my TikTok go from 38 people to like 7,000 people in like 5 days. And then before I knew it, uh, and within 5 weeks, I had 24,000 people. So I could do the marketing plan for the class now. And I was like, great, I think I know what I'm going to do. What I found interesting was all these people were like, you do know me, you do know my life. And it wasn't trauma dumping. It was like, that is my lived experience. Yes, I
Mhm.
experienced this. And I was just like, shouldn't you get help, like mental health? And then it's like, oh, the stigma. This is actually more appropriate for you, right? Because when you think about it, it's still, well, if you care to think about it, I know your background is mental health as well. It falls under psychoanalytics. It's a psychodynamic approach, right? Making the
Mhm.
unconscious conscious. So
Mhm.
by using the cards for free association, people were just able to kind of look at different elements of their life and say, that was something I experienced in my childhood, or that is something I'm experiencing right now. And so, because I was getting all these people, I was like, I think I should do something with this. And so, I created a program called Heal the Ages. And so, I took
Mm.
Eric Erickson's life stages, psychosocial stages of development, and created programming around that. So, for stage one, where there's trust versus mistrust, I did fact versus fiction because it's like what are we talking about when we're talking about trust and mistrust, right? Like
Mhm.
how do you really grow up, right? Like you're because I grew up in the south side of Chicago, right? I've grown up seeing that, like, if you talk and they get hit, like you don't realize that's trauma when you're young. You think that's the way you're being raised. And
Right.
if you see it in your whole family, that to you is normal. It's like that's not normal. So you go out in the world and you start processing things a lot differently than other people. And it's kind of like, I wonder why. And then you see that mistrust present itself. And it's like, I don't think the person meant anything by that. Yes, they did. And it's like, well, why do you think that? And then I was having these conversations with them. They're like, oh, I just go to my tarot card reader. I'm like, you ever tried a therapist? And so I started saying at the end, not every therapist is a healer. Not every healer is a clinician, and not every clinician will minister to your soul. But really, I was giving a lot of people an opportunity to really work through some things, and I didn't realize that that's what people needed. So we
Mhm.
found a silent partner. They were able to offer us funding for each individual that we interviewed. So we did a structured interview. If they made it through the structured interview, we invited them to participate in the program. So they get about $1,400 to participate. So they don't have to worry about paying for it. They were admitted into the program. We get them signed up. The vouchers get produced, and then they go through the program. And they go through with a variety of their other peers who really kind of start acknowledging. And the more everyone was listening, because I used the 8 weeks to assess, I'm like, you guys are meeting the criteria for being on the spectrum.
Mm.
And it was kind of like, I suspected that, but I really didn't know. I was just told stop being so sensitive, or you're kind of awkward, or I'm weird. And, I'm listening to this and it's like, these seem like normal conversations to them.
Mhm.
Mental health, it was like, I feel like I should have a conversation with you about like trauma on the spectrum. like here's what's going on. And then they go, well, who's helping me with that? And I was like, well, I think it depends on what do you want to treat first. And having that honest conversation, like there's no cure for autism. So like, we don't treat it at this stage in the game. Like, it's too late to introduce you to someone who's an applied behavioral analyst because you're 36.
Right.
So how have you been functioning? And then we learn about like just the whole future planning thing, which explains a lot of the um, financial literacy gaps. It explained a lot of the romantic relationship challenges. It was just like, okay, now that we're making sense out of like, here's where you actually are. Now we
Mhm.
can work on these other things, and it's comorbid. It's like you'll have that, but you still have the anxiety. You have that, you
Right.
still have depression, and so just making it very clear that like it's just a combination of these things, but if you didn't grow up in a household where people believed that, like, there was one of the participants once said, well, no, my family knew I was different. They used to say, she's touched, and that's not uncommon, right?
Right.
And so, but they didn't know that
But
she's touched meant she was on the spectrum. They didn't know
right.
that.
Right.
Long, I apologize.
It just made me laugh because I've heard heard that from so many different families. They say it don't really know what that means other than like just don't pay her no attention sometimes is what it means, but
Yeah,
not
and then it
how do we
exacerbates
help
the
support.
issue. Yeah, and then it exacerbates the issue, right? The sense of otherness gets reinforced, and this inability to feel like you're connecting to others, and
Right.
then just this, isolation that starts to happen with that, which then kind of amplifies the depression because it's like, well, I've been weird, or people push me away my whole life, and then they haven't. Like, I think we still have to get to the point where we're embracing neurodiversity.
Right. And that I'm so glad you said that because that leads right into my next questions because I was wondering, based upon your advocacy for neurodiversity and inclusivity, what untapped potential does neurodiversity hold for redefining leadership models, especially in terms of high stress environments like in the military or any fast paced business sectors?
Well, the military has like really strict, like you can pass go. So there's some limitations there. But one of the things, and I can share because I was hit by a car when I was 6. So, by the criteria, I had some different challenges like refocusing, centering. And so I ended up with that ADHD diagnosis really early. Like I'm partial remission because I've just figured out how to live life.
Hmm.
But I was always like, not squirrel, they're like squirrel, squirrel, squirrel. I'm just like, I can't sit still and I'm bored. And so if you want to be in a fast paced environment because you get bored and you're ADHD, hyperactive or combined type, that might work out for you. And recently there was a listicle produced by Forbes that talked about um, being like a superpower, right? Like when you're neurodiverse, you do see things differently. And because you see things differently, the way that you would see something playing out is going to be probably an advantage compared to your neurotypical peers, who, it's like that bandwagon effect versus somebody who's like, you always have that one person in the crowd where it's like, one of us is not like the other. And the person who's not like the other, maybe they're not embraced in the beginning because it's so different. It seems radical. But then when they do their plan and it doesn't fall, because the ADHD types and some of the other neurodiverse types, they stand out. They tend to stand out. And
Right.
sometimes standing out means they stand alone.
Hmm.
And because they stand alone, they might not necessarily be in agreement with the plan for what everyone else says. It's like, okay, this is within our normal limits, right? They watch it happen and they go, I know this isn't going to work out. And then they watch it fall apart. And everybody's like, I guess we should have asked them. They always have the best ideas. And then they see things kind of come to fruition. And that's actually one of the things that entrepreneurship supports, right? Those who kind of struggle with ADHD and some other ones, they tend to be better entrepreneurs because they can focus on a variety of different things. They have the passion for it. It's like, oh, it fails. That's okay. I'll keep going, right? Failure's not crushing for them. Maybe in the beginning though, because there are those who are like, well, I feel like I'm stupid or I don't get it. And
Hmm.
sometimes it's like, but you're not. You just have to understand that you're processed differently and maybe some strengths that come with you having to have learned how to function because we don't always get that diagnosis right away, is that you're going to have to come up with solutions that make sense for you. And someone else might not necessarily even think to come up with solutions that make sense. They'll take what's offered and provided immediately, not realizing like that's not actually working for them.
Right. So it sounds like partially what you're saying is that if an organization really needs a lot of innovation, that these are the people that would think outside the box and not bring those bandwagon ideas. Um, but they may need a companion or a support person that does a lot of the implementation or the
Mm-hmm.
strategizing for it, but they can give
Mm-hmm.
you a lot of that.
Oh, they could be your chief creative officers. That's what I call myself in my company. People are like, you're the CEO. I'm like, I am, but I'm the chief creative officer. I got campaigns for days, but I need like an operations person sometimes, because I'm such a visionary that like I know certain research that I have to do just bores me to tears. Where it's just like, who likes that? Because I don't like that. Like, and it's not that I can't do it, but I know it's going to take longer
Right.
versus giving it to somebody where it's like that's their strength, right? And I
Hmm.
think that's a beautiful thing because you had to learn your own strengths. You're going to identify strengths in other people pretty fast. But the
Right.
downside to that is you people's red flags. So you got to find your balance there. Again, I think everybody has a space, but there's also, things like accounting. Financial industries tend to have a pretty high rate of people who are on the spectrum. Engineering, things where it's like you just have to really like it, and you'll
Hmm.
find more people who are neurodivergent in those type of arenas where it's like, no, I just really like that, and then you get to know them like you all are pretty quirky.
You're right. Because I think the best bookkeeper I had, she was on the spectrum, and after I was working with her for a little while, she's like, "I don't know if you know, but I need to tell you that I'm on the spectrum." I was like, "I knew, I def- I definitely knew," and but it was a little bit of a challenge for me because I'm not very detail oriented
Mhm.
in that regard, but in terms of finances, so it forced me to raise the bar on myself, but I really needed her because that wasn't my strength. So it was such just a wonderful tool. She was such a wonderful tool just to have and be able to support me. And I just really enjoyed working with her. So,
Yeah, and that sounds really powerful for her too, because you were affirming, and at the same time, you let her shine in what she just naturally likes to do.